If you need to pass GED RLA or HiSet reading, know that you're in the right place. Because in this video, I'm going to break down passages and practice questions that are similar to what you can expect on the real test, and I'm going to throw out many tips, tricks, and strategies to help you move ahead faster so you can move on to bigger and better things in life once you pass. And one more thing before we jump in, I'm going to be reading the passages at a moderate pace, and I do ask for you to please pause the video and read at a pace that is going to work for you if I'm reading too fast for you at any time. So with that said, let's get started. Thank you for joining me.
Dandelions. There is a field of dandelions to the east of my home. Their buttery yellow heads peek through green blades of grass, and they grow tall against the earth. I have watched children pluck them, squeeze them midway down the stem and pull, then tuck them behind their ears, the ears of their parents and in the collars of their golden retrievers and poodles. My sister, though, who will be 4 this fall, patiently waits until they're white, fluffy, and prepared to succumb to her soft breath. Margaret will do as she did last year. Come to me in the morning, because she investigates every morning to determine if the dandelions are done, like the collages Grandma bakes us for breakfast. Then grasps my hand and announces, "It's time, Katie." They're ready. I cherish this ritual with Margaret. She ushers me to the field, where we first recline on our backs and examine the sky to decipher traces of our lives in the clouds. Margaret points to 3 conjoined clouds and designates it as our family. We detect our friends, our favorite foods, and ourselves in the clouds. We laugh, roll over, and discover we've gotten some of the dandelion dust in our loose hair. Although I'm much older than she is, I do not find this absurd. Instead, Margaret, in moments like these, embodies a certain wisdom and genuine benevolence I hope to never lose with age. Unlike the others who pinch and yank at the stalks, Margaret sends the seeds off with kisses. She scoots in a military crawl to the first dandelion whose dust is ready. "All set?" she asks. "Yes," I say. And with our cheeks nearly touching, our lips puckered toward the dandelion, we blow a kiss. White dandelion fuzz drifts through the air and disappears over the field as we blow more kisses and watch the seeds float like bubbles before gravity intervenes. "It's like they're racing, Katie," she says. "Where's the finish line?" I ask. "Everywhere," she exclaims. Margaret will remember this, I know, when she is my age. Just as I will remember her autumn kisses to the dandelions, which she refused to pluck because they were too beautiful, she'd once said. And I will remember the snowmen we created together on early winter nights, the gaping mud puddles we dashed through in the spring, and when summer approaches, it will be the sprinklers on college campuses that will remind me of her. She laughs and twirls as she leaps in and out of the sprinklers, with wet blades of grass clinging to her wrinkled soles. She loves to dash, with her arms flung wide and her head thrown back toward the sun, as though every glistening arc of water is a finish line to be crossed. Question 1. The comparison of the dandelions to Grandma's kolaches emphasizes A. The manner in which the dandelions grow, B. The appearance and scent of the dandelions, C. The anticipation associated with the dandelions, or D. The time of day in which the dandelions flower. So now's your chance to pause the video, go back to the passage as needed, take all the time you need, try to answer this question, and then when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, let's talk about this question here. So C is the correct answer, and I've kind of put some of the text on the screen here from the part of the passage that's relevant here. And so basically you need to see here that the story is comparing waiting for dandelions to turn white with waiting for kolaches to be ready for breakfast. So hopefully you see why C is the right answer. Whether you got this right or wrong, hopefully this one makes sense. So let's look at the second question. So I've taken the text from line 9 and pasted it on the screen here to hopefully help save you some time here. But basically, the question is, as it is used in line 9, the word ritual means A, a serious event, B, a repeated activity, C, a stage of life, or D, a conventional habit. So now's your chance to pause the video, take all the time you need, feel free to refer back to the passage as needed, and pick is the answer A, B, C, or D. Okay, thank you for sticking with me. I hope that this question went well for you, and even if it didn't go so well, hopefully you learned something here, because the correct answer is B, a repeated activity. And this is just one of those questions where you just have to look at the context here of what's happening. It says, I cherish this ritual with Margaret. And hopefully, if you think about the word ritual used right here in this line and the context of the passage, hopefully you'll see that the answer is B, a repeated activity. Okay, question 3. When the narrator and Margaret decipher traces of their lives in the clouds, they are A, finding similarities, B, predicting futures, C, educating themselves, or is the answer D, ridiculing themselves? So as always, now is your chance to try to figure this out. You can go back and look at the passage as long as you need to. Just pause the video, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so before I reveal the answer, one thing that I want to point out here is that the word narrator, the narrator is just the person that is telling the story in the passage, all right? And maybe you knew that, maybe you remember that, so great. But if not, just remember that the narrator is just a big word that refers to the person who is telling the story. Okay, so if we look at this part of the passage, it says, Margaret points to 3 conjoined clouds and designates it as our family. We detect our friends, our favorite foods, and ourselves in the clouds. So simply put, they're looking at shapes in the clouds and looking at how they are similar to things in their lives. And hopefully you see that A is the correct answer here. Okay, so we're moving right along here. As always, thank you for sticking with me. Question 4 says, all of these excerpts use language that supports the idea that youth is fleeting except A, dandelions prepared to succumb to her soft breath, B, our lips puckered toward the dandelion, C, fuzz drifts through the air and disappears over the field, D, seeds float like bubbles before gravity intervenes. So as always, now is your chance to give this one a try. Go back to the passage and reread if you need to, and if not, that's fine too. Whatever works for you, but you can pause the video and try to figure this out. So the idea that youth is fleeting is rather depressing of a concept, but unfortunately that's what we have to discuss here in this question. So let's talk about this. The answer is B. I've highlighted that, but let's talk about why. So let's look at A here. So what does the word succumb mean? Well, succumb, basically what's happening here, succumb means that the dandelions fall or give up or yield to her soft breath. So in C, fuzz drifting through the air, think about it this way, it only lasts temporarily before it disappears, right? Similarly with D, seeds float like bubbles, but this doesn't last forever because gravity intervened. So in each of these, we see something that is only temporary, whether it's the fuzz drifting before it disappears, seeds floating like bubbles until gravity intervenes and takes them down, and the dandelions succumbing to the soft breath, all right? So each of these is a similar theme to youth being fleeting, which again is a rather depressing concept. But anyway, B is the odd one out. B says, our lips puckered toward the dandelion. Nothing's really temporary and then being destroyed here. So B is the right answer. And so sometimes for questions on the test as a general tip, look at similar answer choices, right? And if you can kind of find the one answer choice that's not like the other, sometimes that's going to be right. All right, so if you got this right, great work. And if not, great work for trying and sticking with it. Hopefully you're learning either way. Okay, let's talk about question 5, or let's go over question 5. It says, how is the last paragraph organized? A, it shows how Margaret has changed over time. B, it connects each season with a memory of Margaret. C, it lists memories of Margaret in order of importance. Or D, it describes what Margaret does while her sister is in college. And you're probably going to have to go back and read the paragraph, or the last paragraph again to answer this question, unless you have a really good memory. But either way, let's have you pause the video now, take all the time you need with this question, and then we'll go over the answer. Okay, so let's look at the answer here. So the answer is B, and I've highlighted some of the reasons for this here and put the text on the screen from the last paragraph. Basically, it's talking about autumn here, and it also says, and I will remember the snowmen we created together on early winter nights, the gaping mud puddles we dashed through in the spring, and when summer approaches. So it's basically connecting each season with a memory here, right? The narrator, or the person telling the story here, is discussing memories and connecting them with seasons as we see in the text. So we know that B is the correct answer. Okay, moving right along. Which phrase best describes the relationship between the narrator and Margaret? Is it A, envious rivalry, B, kind consideration, C, devoted attachment, or D, awkward friendship? So now would be your chance to pause the video. As always, take all the time you need on this question. Feel free to refer back to the passage as you need to. And when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so basically, these types of questions asking about the relationships between characters are fairly common on the test, and you really just kind of need to reason your way through them. There's not really a trick or strategy behind these. You just kind of have to think about what the passage teaches you about the characters, look at the interactions between them, look at any quotes, look at any dialogue that's going on, and sometimes process of elimination can be useful too to eliminate answers. So an envious rivalry, we don't see any tension, we don't see any competition going on between them, so that's probably one that I would rule out. An awkward friendship, well, they don't really have an awkward friendship, right? Their relationship, it's not really described as being awkward. Okay, so I would take D out as well, just kind of by thinking through the passage here, which would leave B and C. And so it's always a good strategy to eliminate as many answer choices as you can. That way you're putting the odds in your favor. So even if you had to guess on this question between B and C, it's a 50-50. That's just like flipping a coin, it's either heads or tails, right? So it's a lot easier to get a question right after you've eliminated some answer choices that don't make sense. But anyway, the answer is C, devoted attachment. And I've put a few examples from the text on the screen here, like parts where it talks about things such as grasps my hand, we laugh, cheeks nearly touching, and I will remember. So these are hopefully some clues from the passage that the answer is C, devoted attachment, all right? And B, kind consideration, I could see why you would guess that one as well, but the correct answer here is C, devoted attachment.
So our first champion shoutout goes to Daniela, who just passed all of her tests recently. She says, I took my social studies test, my last test this morning, and I got a score of 169, which is a really high score. And she says, I'm so excited to finally graduate. The next champion shoutout goes to Rin, who passed math with a 176, which is a really, really high score, especially for the math section, which is notoriously the hardest section. Some people have different opinions, but a lot of people will say math is the hardest section. So congratulations for your 176. And our last champion shoutout goes to a test taker who just passed and says, I got to walk the stage May 18th at the age of 34 for my GED. So I just share these experiences here to hopefully inspire you to keep going. I know it's hard, I know it's challenging, I know you'd probably rather be doing something else besides studying for the GED, but I just want to show you what's possible.
So the next passage is called Women's Basketball. Today, basketball is one of the most popular women's sports, both among athletes and fans. Basketball was invented by Dr. James Naismith and introduced to male athletes in 1891. Less than a year later, Senda Berenson, a physical education instructor at a small women's college, decided the game would be a good alternative to the physical fitness activities offered to young women at the time. The rules Berenson established for her female players differed from men's rules. The rectangular playing floor was divided into 3 equal zones. Each team had 9 players, 3 forwards, 3 centers, and 3 guards. A player was restricted to her own zone on the court, could hold the ball for only 3 seconds, and could dribble only 3 times before passing. No stealing was allowed. As women's basketball spread, the sport faced some opposition, including the criticism that too much physical exertion could be harmful to young women. Nonetheless, women's teams formed in high schools, colleges, businesses, recreation centers, and neighborhoods across the U.S. By the 1940s, basketball had become the women's sport most frequently played at the high school level. Rules changed over the years. Some versions of the high school game had a few rover players who were allowed to move freely between the different zones on the court. However, in many states, high school women played 6-on-6 basketball. This game had a two-section court with players restricted to their side of the court. All players were limited to 2 dribbles, and each team had 3 guards and 3 forwards. Only forwards were allowed to shoot the ball. In 1958, the Office of Civil Rights began to consider banning 6-on-6 high school basketball. It was believed that 6-on-6 players were at a disadvantage when competing for college athletic scholarships. The 6-on-6 game was viewed as not being sufficiently compatible with the women's college game, which by then had teams of 5 players with centers, forwards, and guards, all eligible to shoot the ball and run the entire length of the 2-section court. The 1970s were pivotal for women's basketball. The 5-on-5 format at the high school level gained broader acceptance. Also, Title IX passed in 1972. One consequence of this law requiring equal opportunity for women in all programs at public high schools and universities was that basketball eventually became the most frequently offered women's sport at the college level. Another highlight of the decade was that women's basketball became an official Olympic sport in 1976. Women's basketball continued to grow in the following decades. During the 1981 to 1982 season, 32 teams took part in the first National Collegiate Athletic Association (NCAA) championship tournament for women. Current tournaments have twice as many teams. The Women's National Basketball Association (WNBA), a professional league, debuted with 8 teams in 1996, 1997, and now has 12. I think it's debuted with 8 teams. Yeah, there we go. Sometimes I have trouble pronouncing words. With women's basketball continuing to garner so much attention and support from potential players and from fans, the sport seems destined to thrive for years to come. So here's our first question from the women's basketball passage, and the question is, what is the first paragraph mostly about? A. Early basketball coaches. B. The origin of women's basketball. C. The popularity of women's basketball today. Or D. Health benefits of basketball. So you'll probably have to go and take another look at that first paragraph to answer this question. And so I'll give you a chance to pause the video, try to figure this out, and as always, we'll go over the answer, so don't worry whether you get it right or wrong. All we care about for now is the learning. Okay, so I've highlighted the part of the first passage or the first paragraph of this passage that I think is helpful here. But really, what it's talking about here is when basketball was invented. It talks about how a PE teacher at a women's college decided it would be a good activity for young women. And basically, it's just talking about the origin of women's basketball. So B is the correct answer. Okay. Which sentence best describes women's basketball in the 1940s? A. College players were recruited and drafted by professional teams. B. Restrictive rules kept the sport from growing. C. College players began competing in end-of-season tournaments. Or D. Many women played on organized and informally assembled teams. So now's your chance to pause the video, try to figure this out, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so one strategy for getting a question like this right might be to go back to the passage and skim it until you find the part where it talks about the 1940s and review that part. All right, so in many cases on either the GED or the HiSet, all right, a good strategy is going to be to go back and reread parts of the passage that are relevant, and you'll obviously have to balance that time and kind of find a strategy that's going to work for you to manage that time. All right, but for a lot of the questions, you probably won't remember off the top of your head what the answer is. You're probably going to have to go back and review parts of the passage. So that's kind of the strategy here that I would recommend. And hey, if you used a different strategy, that's totally fine. But the answer here is D. And from the part where it says, by the 1940s, basketball had become the women's sport most frequently played at the high school level. Hopefully you would kind of infer from this that D, many women played on organized and informally assembled teams. That's the answer. Okay. How was 6-on-6 basketball different from 5-on-5 basketball? A. The 6-on-6 game was played on a 2-section court. B. Positions for the 6-on-6 game included guards and forwards. C. 6-on-6 players dribbled in their own zone. Or D. 6-on-6 players dribbled more. So as always, now's your chance to pause the video, try to figure this out, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so paragraphs 4 and 5 mostly contain the keys to getting this question right here. So in paragraph 4, we see that 6-on-6 in 6-on-6 games, players were restricted to their side of the court. But in paragraph 5, we see that teams with 5 players could run the entire length of the 2-section court. So this is a little bit of a trickier question, but the answer is C. 6-on-6 players remained in their own zone. C is the correct answer to this question. How is the passage Women's Basketball organized? A. It describes an event and several changes that resulted from it. B. It recounts events in the order they occurred. C. It states a problem and offers a solution. Or D. It compares two ideas. So now is your chance to pause the video, try to figure this out, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. So the answer here is B. Now, note that really the passage starts off with the founding of basketball, then it goes on to talk about the 1940s, then it jumps to the 70s, and all the way into the 90s. And so really it's just recounting the events in the order they occurred, and B is the correct answer here.
So my favorite fast food place out of these choices here, I'm going to go Taco Bell. What is my favorite sport? Well, I wrestled in high school and I did track, and I don't see either of those on here, but to watch out of these choices, I would pick basketball to watch, although my favorite team, which is Pitt, didn't do so well in March Madness. What is my favorite TV show? Well, I like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I don't see that on the list here. Out of these shows here, I'm going to go with Full House. Do you want to teach the next question, Tommy? Nice try, but I don't think those books are going to be on the test. Can you put them back on the bookshelf when you're done?
The following nonfiction passage explains some of the rules imposed by Title IX, part of a federal law. Title IX. Title IX of the Education Amendments, part of a federal law enacted by Congress on June 23, 1972, states, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. In general, Title IX requires colleges and high schools to offer equal opportunities, benefits, and services to females and males in sports, including scholarships, practice facilities, locker rooms, uniforms, publicity, and coaching. Schools are not required to offer identical sports for each sex or identical pay for coaches, but schools must offer equal sport and club opportunities for each sex. If a school offers the same sport to both sexes, has both a boys and a girls track team, for example, the school is not required to allow a student to join the team of the opposite sex. Although probably best known for this application to sports, Title IX also covers employment practices, admissions, participation in school bands and clubs, and admittance to academic programs at covered institutions. However, Title IX regulations do not apply to organizations that have traditionally been limited to members of one sex, such as the Young Men's Christian Association or the Girl Scouts. The Title IX also does not apply to private schools, provided they do not receive any money directly or indirectly from the federal government. So they're doing some kind of construction across the street from our apartment, and there's also people walking by outside. So if you hear any noise, you know that I'm trying to reduce background noise as much as I can as I edit this, but if my mic picks it up, I do thank you for sticking with me and apologize for the background noise if you hear any. But anyway, the first question for this passage says, which groups are excluded from the regulations of Title IX? A. Certain organizations that exist for males or females only. B. Private schools that receive federal funding. C. Public high schools that enroll more males than females. D. Academic clubs at colleges that receive federal funding. So pause the video, take all the time you need, maybe go back and reread if you need to, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so the answer here is A. Certain organizations that exist for males or females only. And the text that is relevant just says, Title IX regulations do not apply to organizations that have traditionally been limited to members of one sex, like the YMCA or Girl Scouts, so hopefully this makes sense. Okay, the next question says, which action by a public school covered by Title IX would be a violation? A. Offering no sports or clubs to any student, boy or girl. B. Purchasing separate uniforms for the girls' and boys' soccer teams. C. Offering unequal sports opportunities to boys and girls. Or D. Employing the same person as coach for a girls' sport and as advisor for a boys' club. So now is your chance to pause the video, try to figure this one out. As always, don't worry if you get it right or wrong, it's just for practice and for learning. And when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll talk about the answer. Okay, so the part of the passage that is mostly relevant here is where it says Title IX requires colleges and high schools to offer equal opportunities, benefits, and services to female and males in sports. And so we kind of see the word equal here, right? It says equal opportunities. This word equal here shows up. And down here in answer choice C, it says unequal. And so sometimes just kind of looking for words in the passage that show up in answer choices can be kind of helpful here. But really, there's not really a trick to all of these questions. Sometimes you just have to reason your way through it, common sense, critical thinking, and go with your best guess. And the whole point of this Title IX is really that, it's requiring equal opportunities to be offered. And so C, offering unequal sports opportunities to boys and girls would be a violation. So hopefully that's clear. Question 13. So for this passage, it says use both women's basketball and Title IX passages to answer this question. It says, what problem in U.S. education was Title IX apparently intended to address? A. Females and males attended separate schools. B. Females and males had few opportunities to play high school sports. C. Females were not playing the same sports as males. Or D. Females and males were not given the same rights and privileges in schools. So now's your chance to pause the video, take your time with this, and as always, we'll go over it whenever you're ready. Okay, so here's some evidence right from the first passage, meaning the women's basketball passage. It says, also, Title IX passed in 1972. One consequence of this law requiring equal opportunity for women in all programs at public high schools and universities was that basketball eventually became the most frequently offered women's sport at the college level. And in passage 2, it says, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So really, answer D is the correct one here. Females and males were not given the same rights and privileges in schools, all right? And I've shown some evidence from the passages that support this on the screen. All right, so question 14 is another one involving both of those women's basketball and Title IX passages. And it says, what do the passages women's basketball and Title IX suggest about opportunities for students in education today? A. Women's opportunities are now better than they were in the past. B. Men's opportunities in sports are lacking, while women's opportunities in sports are expanding. C. Women have achieved many new high school opportunities, but still struggle with limited college opportunities. D. Men are taking advantage of fewer academic opportunities than they did in the past. So now's your chance to pause the video, search the passages as much as needed, and when you're ready, unpause the video. And I probably don't have to keep repeating this by now because you've heard me say it over and over again, but whenever you're ready, we'll go over the answer. So thank you for sticking with me so far into the video. I know you'd probably rather be doing something else, and this isn't the most exciting thing ever, but I do think that it's going to pay off for you, all the hard work you're putting in. So on screen, I have some quotes here from the passages. The first two are from passage 1, where it says, women's basketball continues to garner so much attention and support. Another quote from the first passage where it says, the sport seems destined to thrive for years to come. And then more evidence comes from passage 2 where it says, requires college and high schools to offer equal opportunity. So the answer here is A. In my opinion, the following passage and series of questions is the hardest out of this entire video. You might disagree. If you disagree and think another passage was harder, let me know down below. But if you're ready for a challenge, here's the Champions Challenge passage for the video. Arm wrestling with my father. We lean across the kitchen table, so late. The moon outside grips the clear ice, hardening on the pond. My father's strength is in his eyes. He stares at me. and I know I can never win by pinning his thin arm. That he squeezes my schoolteacher hand as if to explain how little my visit each winter relieves his sadness working all year alone on his farm. He whispers, "Go," and the full weight of our bodies heaves in opposite directions, the thermometer at the window holding exactly at 0. Now his wrist bends, and as if suddenly dancing, our foreheads touch. For that moment, we let go of the distance between us like two men who have just shaken hands in a small room, and have turned slowly away to watch the stars without counting losses. Okay, which of the following states the basic situation represented in this poem? A. A man and his father are stargazing on a cold winter night. B. A man is visiting his father on the family farm in winter. C. A man and his father are refusing to speak to each other after an argument. Or D. A man is recalling childhood games he played with his father. So now's your chance to pause the video, try this out, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. So the lines 9 through 11 tell us how little my visit each winter relieves his sadness working all year alone on this farm. So basically the answer here is B. What's happening is that we have a man and he's visiting his father on the family farm in the winter. Okay, next question. Why does the son know he can never win? As in line 7. A. He sees that if he wins, he will only anger his father. B. He sees that his father has a greater will to win than he does. C. In a contest of physical strength, a school teacher does not have a chance against a farmer. D. Even if he beats his father at arm wrestling, he cannot resolve the difference between them. So now's your shot. You can pause the video, try your best at this question, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so process of elimination, I think, is the way to approach questions like this, especially when you get questions where multiple answers seem like they could be right. Sometimes you just have to eliminate answers that can't possibly be right and go with your best guess and move on and hope that you get the question right. And sometimes you can reason your way through these and you can come to a clear answer choice as your conclusion. But anyway, let's go through these. So A, he sees that if he wins, he will only anger his father. Well, we don't really see any evidence of this, right? There's no mention of anger or anything like this. So A is probably not right here because there's no real evidence that if he wins, his dad's going to be mad at him. So B, he sees that his father has a greater will to win than he does. Well, maybe, but at the end of the passage, though, it does, near the end, it says that they don't count wins and losses, basically. So we don't necessarily know that that is correct. What about C? In a contest of physical strength, a school teacher does not have a chance against a farmer. So this is an interesting dynamic here in the story. We've got the dad who is the farmer, and we've got the son who possibly maybe worked on the farm with his dad at one time and now left to be a school teacher. And so, the farmer who works in the field all day versus a teacher whose job doesn't involve physical strength necessarily. This is an interesting dynamic kind of implied in the story here that we've got a farmer and a school teacher and their lives are different. But I don't think C is the best answer choice here. I think it's more about whether or not he beats his father. Okay, there's still differences. There's still a gap between them. And, winning, really, it's not just about arm wrestling, whether he wins or loses. It's more about the differences between them and the lifestyle. So D is the correct answer here. And really, this is a question you just kind of have to reason your way through it, rule out answer choices that don't have evidence to support them. And also another trick here too is, looking for words that are similar to answer choices. Like here in this line here, it says, for that moment, we let go of the distance between us, right? So there's distance between them. And then down here, it says they cannot resolve the differences between them. So distance between us, differences between them, kind of different ways of saying the same thing. All right. But, the evidence here kind of points towards D, although this is a little bit tricky of a question. So D is the correct answer. Okay. The placement of the detail. The thermometer holding exactly at 0, lines 15 through 16, has the effect of A, emphasizing the severity of the weather that night, B, emphasizing the idea that the match is at a standoff, C, showing how little esteem the men hold for each other at that moment,
Or D, indicating that the sun is not giving the match his full attention. So now's your shot to pause the video, try to figure this out, and when you're ready, as always, we will go over the answer. Okay, so again, let's think about these answers here. So C, showing how little esteem the men hold for each other at the moment. Well, if you don't hold someone in high esteem, right, if you have little esteem for someone, it means that you don't think well of that person or you don't like that person, okay? And we don't see direct evidence that they don't like each other at that moment, all right? Now, what about D, indicating that the sun is not giving the match his full attention? Well, we don't really see evidence of this. In fact, I think it says, if I remember offhand without looking back at the passage, it says, the full weight of her body heaves in opposite directions. So there's evidence that they are both trying hard to win the match, all right? Or they're both trying. They're both want to win. So we don't really know that the sun isn't giving full attention to the match. So this leaves us with A and B. And unfortunately here, both of these answer choices seem like they could be correct. And so I've got a little champion rant here because, this is a really, really important concept here. And, some people don't like it when I give a long-winded kind of rant style explanation for stuff, and I can see why. But, there's a method behind my madness here. I've done this for a really long time, and I really want you to understand something here. And some people watching this might just be kind of irritated that I'm spending a lot of time on explaining this. And, other people will, understand what I'm getting at here. So this is an example of, the tip of the iceberg versus what's deeper down below the surface. All right. So I think that, we know that the setting of the story, it's winter, it's cold, right? And so probably, the thermometer holding at exactly 0. Yeah, I mean, the author probably did on a surface level included this to emphasize how cold it was. All right, but we have to think also deep down below the surface. So the kind of tip of the iceberg, the most surface level obvious reason why the author might say that, the thermometer was at 0 is to emphasize how cold it is, to emphasize the weather, all right? Because we already know it's winter when this story is taking place or the poem's taking place. Okay, but if you think about it, right, they're arm wrestling. At some point the father might push, the arm, towards the right, and then the son might push back and kind of push the dad's arm down to the left, right? And they're kind of going back and forth like this. But right now at this point, all right, they're both pushing and nobody's gaining an advantage, right? They're both tied, they're both even, right? Like the thermometer's at 0, it's not at -1. It's not at +1. It's not bouncing down to -2 and then back up to +2 and vice versa. The thermometer's set at 0. And so this is really kind of a metaphor for what's happening here in the story, that they're kind of locked and they're dead even in the arm wrestling match, all right? So, this is an example of the tip of the iceberg versus what's down below the surface, all right? So in a lot of cases in literature and short stories, especially in older literature and older short stories, all right, which in many cases, the stuff that you're going to get, I'm not sure when this poem came out. This might have been a more recent poem. I don't know. But on the GED and the HiSet, a lot of times you're going to get older stories, right? You're going to get older language. You're going to get words in those stories that we don't commonly hear as much today. But a lot of those stories, the authors have the settings and the details described in a certain way for a specific purpose, okay? And I did a reading comprehension video on a story by Ernest Hemingway called The End of Something. And in this story, what we see is the setting is set in a lumbering town called Horton's Bay. And, it was a thriving lumbering town at one point. They've got a big mill, and the town was thriving. And the mill is torn down and destroyed in the story. And what also happens is the characters have a relationship, and the relationship ends and they break up. All right. So the setting of the story is a town where there was once a thriving lumbering town and the mill was destroyed. And also their relationship in the story, the two characters, they break up at the end. Their relationship disintegrates. All right. So the story is called The End of Something. And the setting of the story is a town that was once thriving and the mill has been destroyed. But the thing that happens in the story is the relationship was once fun and now it breaks up at the end of the story. So a lot of this literature and these stories, the setting and what's happening in the setting, all right, mirrors what's happening in the story. So it's kind of like, hey, it's cold, it's winter, in this story it's cold and it's winter, all right? And possibly that's a metaphor for the relationship between the dad and his son. It's a cold relationship. It's cold, right? There's distance between them, okay? Now, I don't know that for sure. I've never read this poem before. I don't know anything about the author here, all right? But I'm just saying, generally speaking, on the test, they often are going to want you to dig a little bit deeper, right? So a surface, an obvious answer, like the most obvious explanation on the surface level here for the thermometer would be the author wants you to know that it's cold, that it's winter. Okay, so we're told it's 0 degrees out, so obviously it's cold. But we have to think a little bit deeper here, and we have to think that, hey, that thermometer, all right, it's mirroring what's happening in the arm wrestling match. They're at a standoff, they're at a tie. Just like that temperature, it's neither going cold, it's neither getting hotter, it's at that tie. All right, so just an example here, and I know this is a little bit of a mini rant here. Some people are going to hate this rant and they're going to slaughter me down below in the comments for taking up time on this, but some people are going to get what I'm saying here and understand this concept between the tip of the iceberg and what's deeper down, right? The tip of the iceberg, the surface level would be, hey, it's cold, it's winter, but deeper down is, this thermometer represents something that's happening in the story, all right? So just keep this in mind when you go into the test, all right? When you're reading, especially these older stories in literature, a lot of times the authors, the setting is really important to understanding the story. And in some details, the setting of the story directly mirrors what's happening in the story. And in other words, some details the author will put into the story just to give you, a surface level factual information. But in many cases, the detail will represent something deeper, all right? We've seen this earlier in the story. There was that, kind of depressing question about when youth was fleeting, right? I think it was this. Yeah, this question right here. It says, all of these support the idea that youth is fleeting. And so we have things like, hey, the seeds are floating and gravity intervenes and pulls them down. Okay, so there's two meanings here. There's the literal, the seeds float and the gravity pulls them down, right? That's kind of the surface level tip of the iceberg. But if you really think about it, that is more of a metaphor supporting the idea that, hey, youth, you're young once and then it goes away and you grow up, all right? And same with this, fuzz drifts through the air and disappears over the field. The fuzz lasts and it's great and awesome and cool. And then, hey, it disappears eventually, just like youth. You're young and sadly, you're not going to be young forever, right? And I don't want to depress anybody, but it is a little bit of a depressing example here. But I'm just saying the point is, there are surface level details, and then there are also sometimes those surface level details represent something deeper. And in many cases, they want you to pick that answer choice that represents something deeper. Okay, so here we are right now. The answer here is B, emphasizing the idea that a match is at a standoff. So again, the idea here is that, the author probably, obviously, on a surface level, the temperature is the thermometer 0. That just goes to support the fact that, hey, it is winter, it's cold. All right, but if we dig a little bit deeper, we can see that represents what's going on with the arm wrestling match. So again, surface level details often have a deeper meaning that's represented. And when in doubt, they're often going to want you to on the test. It's not always going to be the case, but they're often going to want you to pick that idea that is a little bit deeper. Okay, so just a tip there, take from that what you will. I'm just trying to help you pass. I've done this for a long time. I'm still have a lot to learn, but I've done this for a long time. And, I think that's a really important concept to understand. So the next question says, lines 19 to 23 seem most strongly to imply that for a moment the father and son, A, were calling their wrestling match a tie, B, were not keeping track of who won their wrestling matches, C, forgot their hurts and disappointments with each other, or D, realized that they had each suffered more than they could express. So now's your chance to pause the video, try this out. When you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so this question here, again, process of elimination is a good way to approach a lot of these questions here. But basically, the key here, again, we've mentioned this several times here, is this concept of there's distance between them, all right? So they have disappointments and distance and just things that they're never really going to understand and see eye to eye on. But it seems to say that, hey, for that moment, they let go of that distance between us. So in other words, they're forgetting and putting aside their hurts and disappointments temporarily in that moment. Okay. Which the following does the poem suggest is one of the father's important, quote, losses in line 23? And to answer this, it wouldn't hurt to go back and review line 23. So A says his son has not been as successful as the father had hoped. B, he and his son are never playful anymore. C, his son did not choose to stay and farm with him. Or D, his growing season was brought to an end by early frost. So now's your chance, as always, to pause the video, think this one through, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer.
Okay, so the answer here is C. His son did not choose to stay on the farm with him. So remember earlier it said something about, I can't remember the exact wording offhand, but that the father had to stay alone and work on the farm alone, or that it was lonely being on the farm working. So it seems to imply that the son was working on the farm at one point, but he chose not to stay there and he went on and became a school teacher. All right, so C is the correct answer here. The narrator's tone in this poem is primarily one of A, quiet acceptance, B, bitter self pity, C, angry resentment, or D, pleased satisfaction. So, as always, now's your chance to pause the video, try this out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. So, the answer here is A, quiet acceptance. And I could see why you might think D is the correct answer here, but really this kind of ends the way I see it on a note where they have distance between them, as we've said several times here, and for that moment they just kind of let everything go. And the way I see it is that they both know that they're not ever going to see eye to eye exactly, but they've just kind of accepted that right now. So, please satisfaction, it's not really the reason I would kind of take D out is because it doesn't really seem like it ends on a happy note here. More so than a note of just kind of accepting it and you're not really talking about it. It's just kind of you're going to accept it and move forward. So A is the correct answer here.